Have you ever felt like your life isn't moving forward, no matter how hard you try? Maybe you've set goals before. Maybe you started learning something new, trying to improve your life, chasing a dream that once felt exciting. But after a few weeks, progress seemed slow, almost invisible, and slowly, motivation faded. Here's the strange truth most people never realize. The reason many dreams fail isn't because people lack talent or intelligence. It's because they underestimate the power of small actions repeated every day. In today's story, you'll meet a poor man whose life seemed completely stuck. Long workdays, constant exhaustion, and a future that looked exactly like his past. But one simple rule changed everything. A rule so simple that most people ignore it. What started as a tiny daily habit slowly transformed his skills, his opportunities, and eventually his entire destiny. Not overnight, not through luck, but through something far more powerful. And if you stay until the end of this story, you might realize that the same rule could quietly transform your life too. Most people carry a quiet dream in their chest, a dream of a better life, a better future, a version of themselves that feels stronger and freer. But somewhere between the alarm clock and the exhaustion of the evening, that dream starts to feel distant. Progress seems slow, almost invisible. And slowly, almost without noticing, hope begins to lose its voice. You see it everywhere. People start something with excitement, a new goal, a new habit, a new direction. For a few days, maybe even a few weeks, they push forward with energy. But when results don't show up quickly, doubt creeps in like an unwelcome guest, and suddenly the effort feels pointless. It's a strange thing about the human mind. We admire success stories, yet we secretly expect progress to happen quickly. When life doesn't move fast enough, frustration quietly replaces motivation. People begin thinking, maybe this just isn't for me, and that thought alone can stop a dream in its tracks. Look around and you'll notice something subtle. Many abandoned goals didn't fail because they were impossible. They failed because progress looked too small to matter. One step felt insignificant. One day felt meaningless. So people stopped walking before the road even had a chance to reveal itself. Think about how many times someone starts improving their life. They read a book, start learning a skill, try building something new. But when weeks pass without visible reward, the enthusiasm fades. Life returns to its familiar rhythm. Comfort replaces ambition. The truth is, slow progress can feel like failure, even when something is quietly growing beneath the surface, like seeds planted in dark soil, invisible for weeks before they rise. But most people never stay patient long enough to see the first green leaf. They walk away just before the miracle begins. And here's the irony. The very thing they're waiting for, the big result, is usually built from hundreds of tiny actions. Small steps repeated day after day. Simple efforts that seem almost too ordinary to matter. Yet those quiet steps are the ones that change everything. But very few people truly understand this. And even fewer have the patience to live by it. That's why most dreams fade long before they have a chance to grow. And that's exactly where our story begins, with a man who almost gave up for the same reason. In a quiet corner of a crowded city lived a man most people would never notice. He wasn't famous, wasn't powerful, and certainly wasn't wealthy. Every morning before the sun fully climbed into the sky, he was already awake. Not because he loved early mornings, but because survival didn't give him a choice. Life had placed him in a position where rest was a luxury. His small apartment barely held together the pieces of his life. A worn-out table, a thin mattress, a few scattered bills waiting to be paid. Nothing in the room suggested success or comfort. But if you looked closely at his eyes, you'd notice something unusual. Behind the exhaustion, there was still a spark. Each day he left home carrying the weight of long hours ahead. His job was demanding, the kind that drains the body before the afternoon even arrives. The work paid just enough to keep food on the table and the lights barely on. There were no shortcuts, no special opportunities waiting for him, just effort and more effort. On his way to work, he often passed buildings filled with people chasing bigger dreams. Entrepreneurs opening shops, students learning new skills, professionals climbing careers. Sometimes he slowed his steps just to watch them for a moment, not with envy, but with a quiet question sitting in his mind. How do people actually change their lives? The strange thing was that he wasn't lazy. In fact, he worked harder than most people around him. But effort alone didn't seem to move his life forward. Day after day looked almost exactly the same. Work, exhaustion, sleep, then repeat. Still, deep inside him lived a stubborn dream, a vision of one day escaping the constant pressure of survival, of building something that belonged to him, of waking up without the heavy feeling that life was passing him by. It was a dream he rarely spoke about, because when reality surrounds you every single day, dreams start to feel fragile, like glass that could shatter if exposed to too much doubt. So he kept his ambitions hidden inside quiet thoughts. He carried them silently through long workdays, hoping they wouldn't disappear completely. What he didn't realize yet was that his biggest challenge wasn't poverty. It wasn't his job, his environment, or his lack of resources. The real battle was something far more invisible, and very soon, that battle would begin to reveal itself. At first, the routine didn't feel like a prison. It just felt like life. Wake up early, work hard, come home tired, repeat the next day. Millions of people live this way, so he told himself it was normal. But slowly, something inside him began to feel heavy. Days started blending together like identical pages in a book. Monday looked like Tuesday. Tuesday looked like every other day before it. No matter how much effort he gave, nothing around him seemed to change. The horizon of his life stayed stubbornly still. Sometimes at night he would sit quietly on the edge of his bed. The room was silent except for the distant sounds of the city. That was when the questions appeared. Is this really how my life will always be? And honestly, he didn't know the answer. He had tried to change things before. A new plan here, a new idea there. Once he tried learning a skill after work, but exhaustion always won the battle. Another time he attempted a side project, but progress felt painfully slow. Eventually, discouragement whispered louder than hope. It's a dangerous moment when effort stops feeling meaningful, because when a person works hard and sees no progress, something inside them shrinks. Confidence begins to erode like stone under constant rain. The mind starts creating quiet conclusions. Maybe this is just the life I'm meant to live. And once that thought appears, it spreads quickly. Suddenly every failure feels like proof. Every delay feels like confirmation that change is impossible. The dream that once felt exciting now feels unrealistic, almost childish. He didn't complain much about it. Most people around him were fighting similar battles. Everyone was busy surviving their own version of the same struggle, so he carried his frustration silently, like a weight only he could feel. But deep down, something else was growing too, a quiet tension, the uncomfortable sense that life was slipping by while he stood still, and sooner or later, that feeling would push him toward a moment he could no longer ignore. One evening, after another long day of work, he took a different route home. Not because he planned it, it just happened. The streetlights were flickering on and the city carried that tired evening hum. People were rushing somewhere, chasing something, and he walked slowly through it all. As he passed a small cafe, something caught his attention. Inside sat a man around his age, speaking confidently with two other people. Papers spread across the table, ideas flowing, excitement filling the air. They weren't just talking, they were building something, and the energy in that room was impossible to ignore. For a moment he stopped outside the window, not to stare, just to observe. The laughter, the plans, the feeling that something meaningful was happening. And suddenly a quiet thought landed heavily in his chest. That could have been me. It wasn't jealousy that hurt him, it was realization. Years had passed while he waited for the right moment to start something bigger. Years spent thinking he needed more time, more resources, more confidence. But the truth standing in front of him was uncomfortable. Opportunity doesn't wait politely for people to feel ready. It moves forward with those who are already in motion. And in that moment, he understood something painful. While others were experimenting, failing, and learning, he had been waiting. The walk home felt longer that night. His thoughts were louder than the city traffic around him. Memory after memory surfaced. Ideas he once had, plans he never started, not because they were impossible, but because he delayed them. When he finally sat in his small apartment, the silence felt different. It wasn't the usual tired silence after work. This one carried weight, the kind of silence that forces a person to look honestly at their life. And he couldn't avoid the truth anymore. He didn't know exactly what to do yet, but one realization had become impossible to ignore. Waiting had quietly stolen years of his life, and if nothing changed soon, the next 10 years would look exactly the same. That night, sleep didn't come easily. He lay on his thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, replaying the same thoughts. The image of that cafe kept returning to his mind. People building something, moving forward, creating opportunities, and he couldn't shake the feeling that life had been quietly passing him by. For years he had believed success required something dramatic. A big opportunity, a sudden breakthrough, a perfect moment to begin. But the more he thought about it, the more that belief started to crack. Because the people he had just seen didn't look like they were waiting. They were simply doing something. That realization stirred something inside him. Maybe change didn't require a miracle after all. Maybe it started with something much smaller, something almost embarrassingly simple. Just action. Not giant action. Not the kind that transforms life overnight, but the kind that moves a person forward, even if the step feels tiny. One decision, one effort, one improvement each day, small enough that excuses could no longer hide behind fear. He sat up, grabbed an old notebook from the corner of the room. The pages were mostly empty, slightly bent from years of neglect. For a moment, he stared at the blank paper. Then he wrote one simple sentence. Do one thing every day that moves my life forward. It sounded almost too simple, almost naive. But the more he looked at those words, the more they felt powerful. Because unlike his past plans, this one didn't require perfection. It only required showing up. He thought about what that could actually look like. Reading 10 pages of a useful book, learning one new concept about money or business, practicing a skill for just 20 minutes after work, taking one small step instead of waiting for motivation. The decision didn't make him rich overnight. It didn't magically solve his problems, but something important shifted in that quiet room. For the first time in years, he wasn't waiting anymore. And what he didn't know yet was that this small rule he had just written down would soon lead him to a discovery that would completely change how he understood success. Many of the stories you hear here aren't just stories. They reflect the invisible weight you may be carrying every day. If you're tired of holding pain, responsibility, and guilt that were never yours, I created an ebook called The Weight of Stones That Are Not Yours and More Too bonus for you. It's for those who want to let go, set boundaries, and live with more lightness. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. The next morning felt slightly different. Nothing in his life had changed yet, of course. The same job, the same streets, the same tired body. But now there was a quiet rule sitting in his mind. One action today, no excuses. After work that evening, exhaustion hit him like always. His body wanted the same routine. Eat something quick, lie down, scroll through distractions. But the notebook on his small table reminded him of the promise he made. Just one action, even if it was small. He opened an old second-hand book he had bought months earlier. It was about people who had built their lives from nothing. At first, he only planned to read a few pages, but one story stopped him completely. A simple sentence sat there like a challenge. The story described a successful man who once said something surprising. He didn't credit his success to talent, luck, or intelligence. Instead, he spoke about something far less glamorous. A habit so simple most people ignored it. Consistent effort over long periods of time. The idea sounded almost too ordinary. But the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. Great buildings aren't raised in one giant movement. They rise brick by brick, day after day. Progress hides inside repetition. Suddenly, he started seeing the pattern everywhere. Athletes train daily, not occasionally. Musicians practice scales thousands of times before performing beautifully. Successful businesses grow from countless small decisions made consistently. Nothing powerful appears overnight. That realization hit him with unexpected clarity. Maybe the problem in his life wasn't effort. He worked hard every single day, but his effort had never been pointed in a direction that compounded. It was survival effort, not growth effort. And for the first time, the rule in his notebook felt bigger than he realized. One meaningful action every day. It sounded simple, almost insignificant. But if that idea was true, then his life might be standing at the beginning of something powerful. That night, the idea refused to leave his mind. Consistent effort, not bursts of motivation, not occasional ambition, just steady movement, repeated every day. Simple, almost boring, yet strangely powerful. He realized something important. If he wanted his life to change, he couldn't depend on motivation. Motivation fades the moment life becomes difficult. Instead, he needed a system, something small enough to follow even on his worst days, a rule stronger than his excuses, So he returned to the notebook and refined his promise. Not just any action each day. It had to be something meaningful, something connected to the future he wanted to build, even if the step was tiny. He wrote a short list under his rule: learn one useful skill, improve his financial knowledge, work on a small side project, connect with people who think bigger. But the most important part of the system wasn't the task itself. It was the consistency. 10 minutes counted, 30 minutes counted, one focused hour counted even more. For example, if he felt exhausted after work, he still had options. He could read 10 pages of a valuable book, watch a short lesson about business or personal growth, write ideas for something he might build later. Small actions, but deliberate ones. He also made another quiet rule: no day would end at 0. No matter how tired he felt, he would do something, anything, that pushed his life 1 inch forward. Because an inch every day becomes distance over time, and distance changes destinies. At first glance, nothing about this system looked impressive. No dramatic plan, no overnight transformation, just a poor man with a notebook and a daily rule. But hidden inside that simplicity, a powerful engine had just started turning, and very soon, he would discover something difficult. Following a rule is easy when motivation is fresh. The real test begins when life pushes back, and those first days were about to challenge him more than he expected. The first few days felt surprisingly hopeful. There was a quiet excitement in following his new rule. After work, even though he was tired, he still opened his notebook. Sometimes he read a few pages, sometimes he wrote ideas. Small steps, but they felt like movement. But motivation has a short lifespan. By the end of the first week, reality began to push back. His job became more demanding, his body more exhausted. One evening, he sat at the table staring at the notebook, barely able to keep his eyes open, and a familiar voice appeared in his mind. Just skip today. It sounded harmless. After all, he had worked hard all day. Missing one evening wouldn't ruin anything, right? That's exactly how old habits quietly return. For a few minutes, he almost closed the notebook. The bed looked far more inviting than effort. But then he remembered the rule he had written. No day would end at 0, not even the difficult ones. So instead of an hour of work, he chose something smaller. He read 5 pages from a useful book. Not 20, not 30, just 5. It took less than 10 minutes, but the rule survived the day. The next evening tested him again, then the evening after that. Some days his progress looked almost laughably small, but he began to understand something important. Consistency doesn't require perfect conditions. In fact, the most powerful days were the hardest ones, because those were the days that proved his discipline was real. The days when he moved forward despite fatigue, despite doubt, despite the absence of visible results. Still, progress remained invisible. Weeks passed, and his life looked almost the same. The same apartment, the same job, the same financial struggle. And quietly, a new question began to appear in his mind. Was any of this actually working? Because very soon, he would face the most dangerous stage of any transformation, the moment when effort continues, but the results are still nowhere to be seen. For a long time, nothing seemed to change. The same small apartment, the same exhausting job, the same quiet routine of effort after long work days. From the outside, his life looked exactly as it always had, but something subtle was happening beneath the surface. The man who once ended his evenings in distraction was now learning, page by page, idea by idea, skill by skill. It didn't feel dramatic, yet it was quietly reshaping him. His mind was slowly becoming sharper. Weeks turned into months, and without realizing it at first, he began noticing small differences. Concepts that once felt confusing now made sense. Problems that used to intimidate him now felt manageable. Confidence started growing in quiet, steady layers. Sometimes he would look back at old notes in his notebook. Ideas he had written months earlier now looked incomplete, not because they were wrong, but because he had grown. The person writing those notes back then knew less than the man reading them now, and that realization surprised him. He also began experimenting with tiny projects. Nothing grand, nothing risky, just small attempts to apply what he was learning. Testing ideas, adjusting them, learning through action. Each attempt teaching him something valuable. Many of those attempts failed. Some ideas didn't work at all. Others barely moved forward. But this time, failure didn't feel like defeat. It felt like information, because the rule kept him moving. one action every day, even when progress looked invisible, even when results stayed frustratingly small. The quiet rhythm of effort continued, and then something interesting began to happen. A few people around him started noticing changes. The way he spoke, the ideas he shared, the clarity in his thinking. It wasn't success yet, but it was the beginning of momentum. And momentum has a strange power. Once it begins, opportunities start appearing in unexpected places. Doors that once felt invisible slowly come into view, and before long, one moment would arrive that proved everything had been building for a reason. For a long time, his progress had been invisible. Learning, practicing, experimenting, all happening quietly behind the scenes. Most people around him still saw the same man with the same job, but inside, something had changed. His thinking was sharper, his confidence stronger. One afternoon during a break at work, a coworker approached him. They had been talking recently about ideas, money, and small business opportunities. The coworker had noticed something different about him. The way he explained things, the way he thought through problems. It was clear he had been learning something. "Hey," the coworker said casually, "you seem to understand this stuff better than me. Would you mind helping me figure something out?" It wasn't a big request, just advice about a small project the coworker wanted to try. But that simple moment meant more than it appeared. For the first time, someone was asking for his knowledge. Not his labor, not his time at work, his ideas. The things he had been quietly studying night after night. And suddenly, those long evenings didn't feel invisible anymore. They sat together during the break, talking through the idea. He explained a few concepts he had learned months earlier. Ways to test the idea, ways to start small, ways to reduce risk. Nothing extraordinary, just practical steps. But his coworker listened carefully. A few weeks later, that same coworker returned with excitement. The small idea had actually worked. Not a fortune, not a massive success, but enough to prove something important. The knowledge he shared had real value, and that moment hit him with unexpected force. All those quiet evenings of learning weren't meaningless. They had been building something inside him, something useful, something others could benefit from. That single experience opened a new possibility in his mind. If knowledge could help one person, maybe it could help many people. Maybe those daily actions had been preparing him for more than he imagined. And soon, that realization would push his life in a direction he never expected. That small moment changed the way he saw himself. For years, he had only thought of himself as a worker, someone who traded time and energy just to survive. But now there was a new possibility forming quietly in his mind. Maybe he could create value beyond physical effort. The idea didn't explode overnight. Just like everything else in his journey, it grew slowly. He continued following the same rule. One meaningful action every day. Learning, experimenting, helping when he could. Soon another coworker asked him for advice. Then a friend of that coworker. People began approaching him with small questions. How to start something simple. How to avoid common mistakes. Nothing dramatic, but the pattern was growing. At first, he didn't charge anyone for his help. He was simply sharing what he had learned. But someone eventually insisted on paying him for guidance. Not a large amount, just a small thank you. Still, it was the first time his knowledge created income. That moment felt surreal. Years earlier, he believed opportunity belonged to other people. People with better backgrounds, better resources, better connections. Yet here he was, standing inside a moment he once thought impossible, all because of small daily effort. He continued building on that foundation, studying more, testing ideas, helping more people. Each day still followed the same simple rule: never allow a day to end without moving forward. Even the smallest step still counted. Months turned into years. The side efforts grew into real projects. The knowledge he once struggled to understand became tools he could use. Slowly, quietly, the direction of his life shifted. The man who once survived day to day was now building something. And if someone had asked him what changed everything, he wouldn't point to a lucky moment or sudden breakthrough. He would point to something much simpler. A quiet habit repeated every single day. A habit that most people underestimate, because the truth behind his transformation was not a secret reserved for special people. It was a principle available to anyone willing to follow it, and that principle would soon become the most important lesson of his entire story. If you look at his life now, it might seem like a story about success, a poor man who slowly built something meaningful for himself. But that's not really the most important part of the story. The real lesson hides in something much quieter, something that most people overlook every single day. His transformation didn't begin with talent. It didn't begin with money, connections, or special opportunities. In fact, nothing about his situation looked promising in the beginning. What changed everything was a simple shift in how he treated his days. He stopped waiting for big moments. Instead, he started respecting small ones. A few pages read after work, a short period of practice, a small experiment, a small improvement, a small action. Nothing impressive by itself. But here's the powerful part most people miss. Those small actions didn't stay small. Day by day, they stacked on top of each other, like bricks slowly forming the walls of a building. And eventually, the structure became impossible to ignore. Think about your own life for a moment. Not the giant goals you dream about, but the small choices that shape your days. The 10 minutes you could spend learning something valuable. The habit you could start today. Maybe it's reading a few pages of a useful book every night. Maybe it's learning a skill online for 20 minutes. Maybe it's writing down ideas, improving your health, or building something small. Individually, those actions seem insignificant, but repeated daily, they become powerful. The truth is, destiny rarely arrives in dramatic explosions. It grows quietly inside consistent behavior. Small efforts repeated long enough begin to compound. Skills deepen, confidence grows, opportunities appear, and suddenly life starts moving in a new direction. The man in this story didn't possess a secret that others lacked. He simply followed a rule that most people abandon too early. Show up. Take one meaningful action. Repeat tomorrow. Again and again, even when progress feels invisible. Especially when it feels invisible. Because one day, sooner than you expect, those small daily actions begin to reveal their true power. And when that moment comes, you realize something incredible has been forming all along. A completely new version of your life.